Jag ska byta språk. Ja. Jag ska börja med... I shall begin with an explanation, I think, of some of the terms. It's a bit specialized. Chronotope, it comes from the Greek chronos, which is time, the god of time, and tope, I think it's topos, but it means space anyway. Albert Einstein published his special theory of relativity, I think it was in 1922, and Bakhtin, Mikhail Bakhtin, which I took the theories from, he was doing a lot of work in the 1920s. He went to a lecture in St. Petersburg on biology, and he heard the term chronotope, and he thought it was interesting. He always described himself as a philosopher, but most of his work was with literature. Cybertexts is something that I've taken from Espen Aarseth, the Norwegian researcher who works with game theory. The more common term was hypertext, dealing with electronic texts where the path of reading is determined in some way by the reader through a clickable link, through choices that the reader have to make. But hypertext, I think, is somewhat restrictive in that readers are not just reading words anymore, they're reading pictures and they're moving into rooms, they're experiencing what I argue is actually narrative in many different forms. So I think cybertext is a much more suitable term. And the next section, Bakhtinian theory for tracing sources of narrative in interactual virtual environments. As I worked on this, it sort of struck me that it was somewhat of an archaeological project, because I've long been a fan of William Burroughs' writing, and actually one of the connections between my work and Gottfried's is that Gottfried used the Turing test in his work. And Alan Turing, the man who formulated that test, was a teacher at Columbia University in New York. And he actually taught quite a few of the writers who were involved with the Beat movement. I used William Burroughs' Naked Lunch. I see this group of writers as dealing with a situation that hadn't emerged before after the Second World War, when we had the ability to destroy all life on the planet through atomic weapons, and beginnings of globalization, contact with other cultures and other religions. Many of them were influenced by Buddhism, and also lifestyle choices that were, up until the Second World War, just not possible to make in public, such as homosexuality. So this is the paper texts are William Burroughs' Naked Lunch. It was first published in 1959, a very controversial book. I think if you look past the controversy and look into some of his theories of language, it's very interesting, and that's what drove me to choose this text in relation to interactive virtual environments. Another very influential book was Catherine Hales. Very, very good writer, and Writing Machines was something that I drew a lot of information from. And finally, Bakhtin's work, the 4 essays of dialogic imagination. I'll just show you the actual... I'm not going to go back over the essay, but I'll just show you the contents to give you an idea of what I was dealing with. I chose 3 chronotopes from the written text, Naked Lunch: the body, the city, and the author. A chronotope, in order to function, it has to meet within a narrative setting. It's the meeting of time and space. You have to have a character who moves through some situation and something happens and there's interactions. There can be chronotopes within other chronotopes. The easiest way to understand it, I think, is to think of a theatre stage, and then the actors move into the space. They develop some process of dialogue or narrative, and then they move out of the space. And the stage is the chronotope, the meeting place of space and time. And this is what we can use to look at how narrative has changed So the body in William Burroughs' Naked Lunch, I can see as the beginning of a cyborg body, as a body that is not merely contained within a skin. It is telescopic. It can be permeated. And this is a way that Burroughs develops narrative in the text, by creating a body that can interact with other bodies in a physical sense, or the body that dissolves, the body that is torn to pieces, the body that changes, the body that can see a long way. I took this idea of the body and then I looked for a cybertext where I could find it. The same idea. This is part of that text. This is the beginning of it. All the cybertexts that I chose are online. And this is one by an American artist, cybertext author, Jennifer Lay. This is the opening lexia. And then choices are made by the reader. So I'm driving the narrative. And then this is what we meet with. Text created. A lot of the texts that I chose were more poetic than literary. It's more poetry. Mainly because of the necessity for length. I couldn't go into analysing a huge cybertext and have it as a comparative work. It would be too big a paper. So I chose shorter works. Also, the work of Burroughs is quite poetic in a way. He doesn't construct narrative in logical sequence. It's merely stream of consciousness. Then there is what I think changes cybertext from a hypertext is the illustrations using pictures. And this is developing a narrative, but it's not a conventional narrative, it's reader-driven. Something that I found when I researched Burroughs' novel was that it was actually created by a number of authors. He wrote the text, most of it. Quite a bit of it was begun as letters between him and Allen Ginsberg, another poet. These letters became a dialogue between them, and then they were developed into the novel. So it doesn't read as a novel, and it's not in any sort of time sequence. It merely is a flow of observations and images which hold together in a sense more like something that is a hypertext or a cybertext. When it came to actually producing Naked Lunch, they didn't have any order of the chapters. Well, they didn't call them chapters either, they called them routines, and then when it came time to putting the book together, they just sent them all the pages off to the printers, and whatever order the pages came back, they put them in that order, and that's how it was published. It has parallels with surrealist games from the 20s and 30s. I actually have a short one here. The most famous is the Exquisite Corpse, where people would write words on a page, and then it would be folded out. And the most famous being The Exquisite Corpse Will Drink the New Wine, which was done in the early 30s by André Breton. I think that has some influence on this style of narrative. Another big influence is television, which Burroughs was dealing with in the 50s. And it began in the late 40s, early 50s, but by the mid-50s it was possible to have a remote control device attached to the television. And there's a passage that I include in the essay of a group of quite famous writers now, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, Gregory Corso, and Neil Cassidy, one of the characters from On the Road. They're watching television, but they don't watch it as a single program. They thought of it as a game. The box was a game, and then they just click it, and clicking through all night, not watching one program, seeing the whole television thing as one program. I think that Mark Meadows points that out in his work, Cause and Effect, that it was a tremendous effect on the way we put stories together inside our heads. You can't return to an earlier point in this text. You just have to progress. So there's, as Catherine Hales points out in her writing machines, you can divide the text into the material metaphor, which is this, how it's actually materially put together. A book is also a material metaphor, and the form of the book drives the way we read it. And this is the same here. But then I also, in the essay, I divided it into two parts. There's the material and then the internal narrative, which is more suited to the chronotopic analysis. This is just one example of the body. This is a retelling of the birth of Jesus. In this short poem, she puts forward the idea that there was a dead sister left in the cradle, and there was the boy who was taken out and presented to the Magi, and that affected history. And this is the idea that maybe history is not so much what we put in as what we leave out also as a determining factor. And it sets up a cycle of dialogue, which Bakhtin uses a lot of, this idea that for any meaning, for language to function, there has to be two users, and the language that we use is taken from other sources already. Each word already has a meaning, and that's how it works. That's the dynamic of it, the manipulation of that pre-existing meaning. All these texts are available, all the cybertexts are available on the Hum Lab website under the cybertext list that's been placed there. I'll go back to this has to be quick. The city, this is the chronotope that best fitted with Naked Lunch, because I think Burroughs uses it so much to string together narrative in having such a diverse, and it just doesn't hold together the narrative. He had to put it in some sort of framework where you could move around in this text and understand what was going on, have some idea. So he used a city, which is a good device, because you can fill a city with people, and these people can necessarily not know each other, but you hold them together as a city, and it's a way of keeping the text together. One thing that I noticed about the way Burroughs wrote of the city was that he had two cities, and one was the subdivision, which is linear, with boundaries. It operated on a principle of exclusiveness, where people did not mix, where language was isolated and people were isolated also. And I saw this as mirroring Bakhtin's idea of centripetal forces in language, where meaning is controlled by a central unit, and such things as street language, slang, dialects, these are discouraged, and it's a much more rigid system of language, authoritarian. Bakhtin lived under Stalin, so he knew all about it. He was actually sent to Siberia for 7 years for his writing. Then Burroughs' antithesis to this subdivision is the composite city, which is layered and organic. And it's to try and follow that composite city is quite difficult. He has passages where buildings are stacked on top of each other, hundreds of feet into the sky, and people are walking on walkways in the clouds, and all races and all histories are existing in one point, which is logically impossible, but it illustrates an idea that there is diversity and there is heteroglossia. This is a central theme of Bakhtin's that I used also, this idea of many voices. All speech is taken from other sources and all language is taken from other sources, and one person or organization cannot control a language. Language is a living thing, a dynamic thing. For city, for the cybertexts of city, I chose what I think is the most dramatic of the cybertext. Get ready for this. Here it is. This is Don Bosco's Fast City. This is a personal organizer, or a handheld PC, which is becoming more popular. This was produced in 2002 at the University of Singapore. It's driven by this. But there should be sound. Mm. So it's again poetic style of writing. There are 60 lexias involved in this, chosen from this board here. But you can choose each lexia too. If you click on it, you produce the diametrically opposing lexia. Well, this one, if you click on this one, it's here, and so on, moving into the center. Something I noticed about this was that it's a hive configuration, like a beehive. So you can't actually move in a linear fashion even if you want to, because the way to try and move in between lexias is very difficult. If I want to click the one in the middle. Anyway, so of course there's boundaries on the text. It's a representation, so there has to be boundaries on it, otherwise it would be reality. But it's also a musical instrument. In this work, Don Bosco tried to create the idea of Singapore techno music, people living in between, on the edges of things. I think that's something very similar to what Burroughs tried to create in Naked Lunch. I think it's important, any community that is heteroglossic, with many languages or many dialects, and under pressure, which Singapore is because of its location. It doesn't, its political system is uncertain, somewhat authoritarian. As a result, it's a good breeding ground for creativity. People react to these situations. And Don Bosco is trying to produce this idea of people who are very familiar with technology, but who are not quite fitting in. The first lexia actually is someone looking for a job. And then to leave it, there was a gunshot, but it's not on. The city. The final chronotope that I looked at was the author, which is deceptive. There is an author in the text, which is telling you the story, and then there is the author, who is the person. In the case of William Burroughs, he's a very famous person. He has quite a cult following, or had. He died in 1997. But the author who wrote the text is not the same person that we're listening to in the text, so we have to divide this in order to understand exactly what's going on. I identified 5, I took actually from Loranga, a professor in America. She identified 5 authorial voices in Naked Lunch. I classified these in 4 sections and then analysed them according to that. I noticed through the progression of the narrative in Naked Lunch that the 4 or 5 authorial voices become more and more distinct in that they meet each other and have conversations with each other. And different authorial voices address the reader at different times, establishing a presence of the author in different senses. For the electronic text to illustrate this as the authorial voice, I chose this work over here. It's called Fidget. It's a bit small, but it's a description of 13 hours in the life of a body of the author. It was originally performed at an art gallery. He's just describing, what he did was he recorded his voice for 13 hours, describing exactly what his body's doing during that time. This was then created into a performance, into this applet, Java applet, and such things as fingernail digs, pinky stretches, thumb twists, thumb straightens. It's not actually such a story. It's not really a narrative in a sense. I mean, it's a descriptive narrative. But what I thought was interesting about it was that the way that the author was positioned in the text. It's a description of the author, but in a sense it negates the author. It's changeable also, it's interactive. If you choose a word like scratch or thumb draws up a new set of words which continues. Back, keep going. Can be changed in time. You can change the colours. And what's interesting, you can change the size of the text too. So it even ceases, I mean, it's not really language anymore. It's just an image. I was trying to locate the author in this text, trying to find out who it is that's actually speaking to the reader, who's negotiating the text. I felt that there was no author. It's just become language almost without meaning, language taken out of context. The reader has become the author. I think this is consistent with Burroughs also, in that he advised that you can cut into Naked Lunch at any time and read any part of it in any order. It didn't make any difference. So, in a summary, what I was looking at, I think, was the relationship between narrative and the means of expressing narrative. I see narrative as a measuring of reality. All understanding that we have, all knowledge, is expressed through language, and it has to occupy time and space. You can't think outside the time and space. And how that narrative is expressed changes depending on technology, relationships between technologies. And it's a measuring of reality. It's both a construction of reality and a measuring of reality. This is a collection of cybertext that is on the Hum Lab website now. It's growing rapidly as an art form. Whether it's literature or not, I'm not sure. That could be another paper. It's interesting. I think it's narrative, it's storytelling. And when it is elevated in status, I think it will become literature. Thank you.